For someone looking for advice on creating a healthy relationship, you've mentioned some of this. Do you think vegans should marry a meat eater or should they look for vegan?
Yeah, well, I think most important is to choose a partner who's healthy. Very often we assume that it's the differences in our relationships that cause the problems, and differences obviously do bring with them the potential for problems. But more important than the differences between us often is how we relate to those differences. When you choose somebody who's committed to relational health, and who's relationally healthy, many people find that they can navigate these complicated or seemingly complicated ideological differences. And, I talked about building relational literacy earlier. I feel very strongly, very obviously very strongly about the need to do this and the need to promote this for any of us, anyone who really wants to help create a better world. I believe would do well to have as their meta mission, as their overarching mission, to create a more relational world, because that's what we're asking people to do, is to change the way that we relate. And if we don't do this more directly, we can end up just trading one form of oppression for another. So you have people who change the way they relate to farmed animals, they stop eating them, and nevertheless they're abusive or unkind to people who don't believe in them. And they're then feeding the same mentality that needs to be transformed if we ever hope to have the kind of world that we all say, and I believe want to live in. I had mentioned before my second most recent book is called Getting Relationships Right, and it's a one-stop guide to building relational literacy. And there are a number of tools, principles and tools for building relational literacy, but they all stem from the very same formula. And the formula is: you practice integrity and honor dignity. That's it. And this leads to a sense of mutual connection and security. So practicing integrity means simply acting in alignment with your core values of compassion and justice. It's treating somebody else with respect. When you honor dignity, you honor their inherent worth. When you practice integrity and you honor dignity, this leads to a sense of connection between you and a sense of greater security between you. This one formula lies at the foundation of relational health. I call this the foundation, the formula for relational health. It applies to how we treat other animals, how we treat the environment, how we treat ourselves, how we treat other individuals, how social groups interact. And this formula applies to brief interactions, how you relate to the cashier at the grocery store when you're paying for your groceries, as well as to long-term relationships. And it also exists on a spectrum. It's not that, this is a healthy interaction or it's an unhealthy or dysfunctional interaction. It can be more or less so. So on one end of the spectrum are, these healthy behaviors I'm talking about. On the other end of the spectrum are dysfunctional. These are the behaviors and attitudes I call non-relational attitudes and behaviors, right? And they're exactly the opposite. A non-relational behavior is one that violates integrity and harms dignity. And this leads to us feeling disconnected and insecure. And if you think about your own experience, any experience you might have, or any relationship you're in, you can see that this formula applies. If you think about a good relationship you have, you probably believe that person will practice integrity toward you. They'll treat you with respect. You feel that they honor your dignity when they're interacting with you. They're not looking down on you. And you probably feel connected with them and more secure in their presence. And if you think about not such great relationships, you probably recognize that this other person is violating integrity when they interact with you. They're harming your dignity by not perceiving you as being worthy of being treated with respect. And you feel disconnected from them and less secure in their presence. And so we can apply this formula basically universally. And that's one of the things that makes it so handy. And so anybody who's wanting to create a better world, a more compassionate and just world, in my opinion, needs to be committed to building relational literacy and to helping people recognize and be better able to practice this formula.
Should vegans consider themselves better, smarter, or more conscious than non-meat eaters? Should they feel moral superiority?
Yeah, so bringing us back to what I was talking about before, when we place ourselves in a position of moral superiority, we are buying into the false narrative, the illusion, that there's some hierarchy of moral worth, that some individuals are more worthy of moral consideration, being treated with respect, morally better than others. And this is an illusion. I mean, just like it's not rational, for example, for a wealthy, white, US born man to believe that the reason he's more successful, or even just more financially successful than, say, a woman who was born into poverty in El Salvador and who works in a factory. It's not rational for him to believe that the reason he's more successful is because there's something in him that made him better. It's the same thing when it comes to a sense of moral superiority. We are all nothing more nor less than the hard wiring that we've been born with in every single experience we've had every second of our lives. We are the composite of all of these different factors. And it's really important to recognize that to feel compassion is a privilege. If you're in a position where you can feel compassion for others, and then you have the privilege of being able to act on that, that is an incredible gift that you should be very grateful for, the same way that wealthy man should be very grateful for the privileges that entitled him to achieve the kind of success that he did, rather than looking down on people who aren't as successful. So often advocates perceive those who are not advocates or not behaving in the way they want them to behave as somehow less ethically or morally successful. But this is the very same mentality that drives entitlement and that drives privilege. And just think about, like, in your own life, think about one bad experience or one bad day that you have. You're stuck in traffic, everything's going wrong, you're on economy in a flight, your knees are squished up under your chin, you're getting like shoved from all sides, you're late, you're missing your meeting. It doesn't take much to get to the point where it's really hard for you to be your better self. And you really suddenly start not liking who you are and not treating people in a way that you would really like to be able to treat them. It doesn't take much for most people to get to this point where we get snappy and not nice and selfish. And we start focusing on our own self-preservation rather than on expressing compassion toward others. We lose the capacity to feel other-centered because we're suffering so much ourselves. So when you have that capacity to be other-centered and to feel and express compassion toward others, be very grateful for that gift you were given, and don't look down on people who don't have the same gift that you do.